The storm came like a monster from the sea. Rain hammered the Carolina wetlands' swollen rivers, tore through cypress roots, and every living thing struggled to hold on. In the chaos of that night, one fragile life clung to survival. A red wolf pup, barely larger than a house cat, stranded on a fallen log. Its fur was soaked, its ribs visible, its small body shivering as the floodwaters rose. This was no ordinary wolf. This was the last remnant of a species that once roamed across the southeast, now reduced to barely 24 in the wild. And on this night, as the storm raged, even that fragile hope seemed ready to be washed away. Driving the night patrol, a park ranger scanned the darkness. He expected to find broken fences, fallen trees, never this. A sound pierced the storm, a thin, desperate whimper almost drowned by the roar of the flood. He braked hard, stepped into the rain, and followed the cry. And then, in the beam of his flashlight, he saw it. A red wolf pup, alone, trembling, its eyes locked onto his. The ranger froze. He knew the rules. Never interfere with wild pups. Never touch them. Contact wildlife services. But in that moment, watching the tiny creature fighting for its life, the line between law and humanity blurred. The ranger knelt in the floodwater, heart pounding. He could walk away, call it in, let nature decide. Or he could act knowing that every choice carried consequences. His hand extended. The pup whimpered, then collapsed into his palm, too weak to resist. And in that instant, fate bound them together. One man, one pup. A story of survival, of choices, and of a species clinging to existence. What happened next would change both of their lives forever. Before that night in the flood, the ranger was just another face in a long fight against time. His name was never the point. What mattered was his duty protecting a land that had nearly forgotten what a red wolf even was. He grew up in eastern North Carolina, in a town where the marsh met the farmland. His childhood was marked by muddy boots, fishing lines tangled in reeds, and long summer nights listening to whip-poor-wills call under the stars. From his grandfather, he learned the stories of the land stories, of a time when wolves roamed free, when their howls carried across the pine forests like music. By the time he was born, those howls had vanished. As a young man, he chose the badge of a ranger. His job was not glamorous. It was fences, signs, patrols, paperwork, and endless hours in the swamp. But to him, it was a calling. He wanted to defend what little remained: black bears, bobcats, herons, and most of all, the last fragile line of red wolves. Red wolves once numbered in the thousands. They were the ghostly hunters of the South, smaller than gray wolves, but more elegant, their coats brushed with cinnamon and ash. By the 1980s, relentless hunting and habitat loss drove them to the edge. Only a handful survived in captivity. Against all odds, biologists reintroduced them into the wild here in North Carolina's Albemarle Peninsula. It became the only place on Earth where red wolves ran free. But survival was never guaranteed. Farmers feared for their livestock. Poachers took shots from the roadside. Cars struck wolves on back highways. Floods and storms ripped through dens. In 2024, federal records counted no more than 30 wild red wolves left. A species balanced on the edge of extinction, one storm away from disappearing forever. For the ranger, this wasn't just statistics. It was personal. He had seen the remains of wolves shot illegally. He had carried broken bodies off the road. He had knelt beside dens washed out by floodwaters. Each loss cut deep, but each survivor kept him going. Still, there were limits. The law was strict. A ranger could monitor, document, and report, but he could not take a pup home. He could not play hero. Conservation had rules. Rules meant to protect both humans and wolves. And yet, as he patrolled those wild wetlands, He knew that rules alone couldn't save a species. Sometimes it took a heart willing to risk more. The setting itself was a character an endless expanse of wetlands stretching to the horizon. Bald cypress rose like ancient guardians from black water. Marsh grass waved in salt wind. Red-tailed hawks circled high above. At dawn, the world glowed golden alive with egrets and deer. At night, fog wrapped the land in silence so deep that even a whisper of movement felt like a secret. This was Red Wolf country. Beautiful, dangerous, fragile. And into this fragile balance stepped a man and a pup bound together by chance and flood. On the night of the flood, when the ranger saw that trembling pup, he wasn't just staring at an animal. He was staring at a symbol, a living fragment of history, a flicker of hope for a species that had almost vanished. He knew what the manual said. He knew the risks of intervention. But he also knew this: if that pup drowned in front of him, there would be no second chance. The Red Wolf didn't have the luxury of next time. So he reached out, and the story began. The storm eased by dawn, leaving a bruised sky and waters that still swallowed the marshland. The ranger's truck crept down a flooded trail tires, sending ripples across the black water. His radio crackled with weather alerts, but he hardly heard them. His mind replayed the sound he had heard hours earlier, the cry of something small, fragile, almost human in its desperation. He stopped, stepped out, and the world was hushed except for dripping branches and the distant rush of retreating floodwater. Then he heard it again. A faint whimper carried on the wind. He followed boots sinking in mud, pushing through cattails heavy with rain. And there it was. A red wolf pup, no more than a few weeks old, crouched on the splintered trunk of a fallen cypress. Its fur clung wet to its ribs, trembling with every shallow breath. Its golden eyes stared at him, not with defiance, but with the hollow gaze of exhaustion. For a heartbeat, the ranger froze. Training screamed at him, "Observe, record, notify." Do not intervene. Wolves are not pets. Wolves are not strays to be picked up. But something inside him cracked. He had seen too many bodies wolves lost to bullets, to wheels, to water. And here before him was life. Barely hanging on, but alive. He crouched, flashlight beam trembling with his hand. The pup whimpered again, then collapsed too weak to cling to the log. Instinct overruled protocol. The ranger plunged his arm into the icy water and scooped it up. The pup fit easily into his palm's bones, sharp beneath its skin. He could feel its tiny heart hammering against his thumb, racing like a drum in panic. He whispered without thinking, "You're okay now. I've got you." But even as he spoke, he knew those words were a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. The ranger carried the pup back to his truck, wrapping it in a spare flannel. Every step felt heavier, not from weight, but from the choice he had made. He wasn't rescuing a stray dog. He was interfering with one of the most protected species in the United States. The law demanded restraint. But the sight of that trembling body in his arms told him restraint meant death. Inside the truck, he cranked the heater. The pup stirred weakly, a thin cry escaping its throat. Its nose twitched, scenting the air, and then it pressed closer to his chest. Something ancient passed between them, in that moment, a bridge between man and wild. Driving back toward the ranger station, questions assaulted him. Had the pup's parents drowned? Had the pack abandoned it? Or were they searching even now? Would taking it mean stealing it from its family? Or was he the only reason it would live to see another sunrise? He tightened his grip on the wheel. The decision was already made. He had chosen. Still, fear gnawed at him. Not fear of the pup, but of the world he lived in, a world where one mistake could mean fines, suspension, or worse. But in his heart, the logic was simple. Sometimes rules preserve life, and sometimes they bury it. The pup's eyes fluttered open as the truck bumped along the muddy road. For the first time he saw a flicker of something beyond fear. It was curiosity, a fragile question in those golden eyes. "Who are you, and why have you chosen me?" The ranger didn't have an answer. All he knew was that the bond had been sealed. He drove into the gray dawn carrying more than just a wolf pup. He carried the weight of a species, the burden of choice, and the fragile spark of hope. This was not just a rescue. This was the beginning of a test for the pup, for the ranger, and for the future of the red wolf itself. The ranger carried the red wolf pup into his station cabin just as the morning sun broke over the marsh. The world outside still dripped with stormwater, but inside, silence pressed close. He placed the bundle of flannel on his desk. The pup barely stirred. He searched through cabinets for supplies, not much to offer a first aid kit, bottled water, an old thermos of milk substitute meant for abandoned raccoons. His hands shook as he prepared the mixture, warmed it on the stove, and filled a syringe without a needle. Gently, he pressed the liquid against the pup's mouth. At first, nothing. Then, a weak suckling sound. The pup drank, coughed, then drank again. A fragile fight for life had begun. That first night, he barely slept. He wrapped the pup in towels, checked its breathing every hour, and whispered encouragements into the still air. Each sound the pup made, whimper, cough, sigh, was a reminder that life had not yet surrendered. Days blurred into a routine, feedings every few hours, cleaning wounds with antiseptic, recording the pup's weight on scraps of paper. The ranger's cabin, once a place of silence, filled with the soft sounds of claws on wood and tiny yips echoing against the walls. The pup began to change. Its fur fluffed as it dried, revealing cinnamon and charcoal streaks. Its legs strengthened, its steps wobbled but determined. And one evening, as the ranger cooked beans on the stove, he heard it faint but clear. A howl. High-pitched, unfinished, but unmistakable. The sound cut through him. It was as if the ghost of the wild had entered his cabin. He turned, saw the pup staring out the window at the swamp muzzle lifted, calling for a world that might never answer. The ranger's throat tightened. He wanted to believe that call wasn't just instinct, it was memory, bloodline, and ancient echo. But survival was never simple. The pup's health wavered. One morning, it wouldn't eat. Its eyes glazed, its body hot to the touch. Fever. Panic surged through the ranger. He fetched antibiotics meant for rescued dogs, unsure if dosage was right. He cooled the pup with damp cloths, whispered prayers he hadn't spoken since childhood. Hours stretched like years. At midnight, the pup opened its eyes and nudged his hand weakly. Relief washed through him like floodwater breaking a dam. He laughed, then cried alone in the cabin with the wolf who refused to die. Yet even as the pup grew stronger, the ranger faced a storm of his own. Colleagues stopped by suspicious of noises in his cabin. One asked directly, "You're not hiding something, are you?" He lied badly. Regulations were clear and rangers were forbidden to harbor wolves. Any discovery could mean suspension or the pup's removal to a facility far away. But looking at those golden eyes, he couldn't imagine surrendering it to bureaucracy. Not yet. Not when its survival still felt balanced on the edge of every sunrise. Weeks passed. The pup's legs grew steady. It chased moths across the cabin floor, nipped at the ranger's boots, and chewed relentlessly on chair legs. It learned to recognize the sound of his voice, tilting its head with curiosity. And slowly, he learned to speak a new language, the language of trust between man and wild. But the wild was never far away. Nights brought coyotes calling from the marsh, their yips sharp and mocking. The ranger worried the pup would mimic them, lose its red wolf identity. Instead, the pup responded with its own howl, deeper now, truer, carrying a resonance that raised the hairs on the back of his neck. One evening, while repairing fences, the ranger left the pup in the cabin. A sudden crack of thunder startled it. In panic, it squeezed through a window screen and vanished into the storm-soaked night. When the ranger returned, the cabin was silent. The towels lay empty. His heart stopped. He grabbed his flashlight and ran into the marsh, calling, searching. Hours passed. Fear clawed at him. Had coyotes found it? Had floodwaters claimed it after all? Then an answering howl. Weak high, but alive. He followed the sound and found the pup tangled in cattails mud, caked to its fur. He scooped it up, clutching it to his chest, whispering over and over, ever again. I won't let you go again. That night, as the pup slept by the fire, the ranger realized something had shifted. This was no longer just rescue. This was responsibility. He was no longer a bystander in the Red Wolf story. He was part of it. But with that responsibility came a truth he couldn't ignore. The pup was growing stronger, wilder, and the world outside was watching. Sooner or later, someone would notice. Summer storms had always been part of life in the Carolina wetlands, but this one came with a vengeance. Dark clouds swallowed the horizon, and the air thickened with the electricity of a brewing tempest. The ranger knew the signs. He double-checked windows, secured equipment, and pulled the pup close as thunder cracked like artillery overhead. The pup, no longer fragile, but not yet grown, paced restlessly. Its ears twitched, nose flaring. It sensed something the ranger couldn't yet see. When the wind shifted, he understood danger was not only in the sky, it was on the ground. From the tree line, coyotes emerged. 3 of them lean and desperate, driven close to human dwellings by the storm's upheaval. Their eyes glowed with hunger as they circled the cabin. Coyotes had long been a thorn in the Red Wolf's survival. They interbred, diluting the fragile gene pool. They competed for food. And in moments like this, they posed a direct threat. The ranger grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside, heart hammering. He shouted, waved his arms, tried to scare them off. But the coyotes held their ground. The pup, against instinct, stepped out too. Tiny body braced beside the man who had become its guardian. The standoff stretched. Lightning lit the clearing, illuminating a scene that felt primal, man-wolf and the wild challengers who refused to yield. Then the coyotes lunged. The ranger swung a branch, shouting. One coyote fainted, another darted for the pup. In a blur, the pup snapped back, not with the power of an adult, but with the raw instinct of its lineage. It yelped, growled, and for a moment stood taller than its size allowed. The rangers struck the ground, sparks of mud flying. At last, the coyotes scattered into the storm, retreating into darkness. The ranger dropped to his knees, clutching the pup. It shook, panting, eyes wide, but alive. For the first time, he had seen it fight, not just survive, but claim its identity. The pup wasn't a helpless orphan anymore. It was a red wolf carrying the fire of ancestors. But the storm was not finished. Hours later, floodwaters surged again. The ranger realized the cabin's location, perched near a drainage channel, was at risk. Water seeped under the door, rising inch by inch. He gathered essentials, flashlight, first aid kit, his radio, and placed the pup inside a waterproof crate padded with blankets. Then, with rain lashing his face, he carried it into the night. The swamp had transformed into a river. Cypress knees vanished beneath currents, and the ranger waded waist-deep, holding the crate above his head. Each step was a battle against sucking mud and unseen debris. Branches whipped past in the torrent. The pup whimpered, but its eyes never left his face. A log struck his leg, nearly toppling him. Pain shot through his knee, but he gritted his teeth and pushed on. The storm roared around him, a chorus of wind, water, and thunder. Somewhere in the chaos, he slipped. The crate tipped, splashing into the flood. The pup paddled furiously inside, paws slamming against the crate walls. The ranger lunged, hands clawing through water, catching the crate just before it vanished downstream. He pulled it close, chest heaving, shouting words lost in the storm. By the time he reached higher ground, a small ridge dotted with live oaks, his body shook with exhaustion. He set the crate down, collapsed beside it, and finally let the tears come. He had nearly lost it. Again. As the storm passed, dawn broke with a strange peace. Mist rose from the marsh, and birds began to sing hesitantly. The pup curled against him, lifted its muzzle, and released a howl. Not weak, not unfinished. A howl that rang across the ridge like a declaration. I am still here. The ranger listened, chest rising with pride and fear. The howl was beautiful, but it was also a reminder. This creature did not belong to him. It belonged to the wild, and the wild was calling louder every day. That night, as he built a small fire to dry their clothes, he understood that their bond had reached its peak. They had fought side by side, survived storms and predators. They were no longer rescuer and rescued, they were partners. But he also knew the truth that followed: partners could not remain together forever. The storm had proven what they both were made of: courage, resilience, and fire. But it also raised the question: neither could escape what happens when survival means letting go. The storm had passed, but with the clear skies came something heavier than thunder: questions. By now the pup had grown stronger. Its legs were longer, its coat thicker, its eyes sharper. It no longer whimpered for milk every few hours. It tested boundaries, sniffing at doors, pacing the edges of the cabin, pausing to stare at the marsh, as though remembering something older than the walls around it. The ranger knew time was running out, not just for the pup's growth, but for his secret. It didn't take long. A colleague stopped by one afternoon delivering supplies. The ranger tried to keep the conversation short, but a muffled yip betrayed him. The man raised an eyebrow. What was that stray dog? The ranger lied. Got lost in the flood. I'm feeding it until I find the owner. The answer earned a skeptical glance. Everyone knew stray dogs didn't sound like that. Word spread quickly. Soon neighbors, farmers, hunters, locals with long memories began whispering. Some feared wolves. They remembered stories of livestock gone missing, of nighttime howls carrying across fields. They didn't want a predator near their land, flood or no flood. The ranger faced them at a town meeting. Voices clashed. One farmer shouted, "Those wolves shouldn't even be here. They're not natural anymore. They're a government experiment." Another demanded, "What happens when they start taking calves? Or worse, when kids cross paths with one?" The ranger tried to explain wolves kept ecosystems balanced. They hunted deer, controlled coyote numbers, restored a rhythm that had been lost. But fear was louder than science. Then came the call from his supervisor. "Rumors are circulating. If you're holding a wolf, you know the consequences. You must report it immediately." The ranger's throat tightened. He mumbled acknowledgement, but gave no confession. Behind closed doors he stared at the pup, which now circled the cabin with restless energy. It wasn't a secret pet. It was an endangered species protected by federal law. Keeping it hidden was a violation of everything his badge stood for. But then the pup would meet his gaze. It would place its paw on his boot, tilt its head, and release a soft, questioning howl. The ranger felt torn in half between the letter of the law and the pull of compassion. And the wolf was growing. No longer a helpless bundle of fur, it could run short distances, its bark transforming into a true howl. Its teeth, once small and harmless, now sharp enough to pierce wood. It was becoming what it was meant to be, which meant it was also becoming impossible to keep. Neighbors reported hearing howls at night. Hunters claimed to see wolf tracks near the swamp. One morning, the ranger found a warning note nailed to his station door: "Wolves don't belong here. Don't make us handle it ourselves." The threat was real. The law pressed from above, fear pressed from the community, and nature pressed from within the pup itself. He lay awake at night, listening to the pup's breathing beside him, wondering how much longer this fragile arrangement could last. His heart longed to keep it safe forever, but his mind knew the world would not allow it. The choice was no longer if he would let the wolf go. The choice was when. The decision had been circling him for weeks, but now it pressed close, impossible to ignore. The pup, no longer tiny, no longer weak, was growing into a true wolf. Its stride was confident, its howl resonant, its hunger no longer satisfied with measured bottles. It gnawed bones, tested fences, stared into the forest with longing. Every gesture screamed what the ranger already knew. This creature belonged to the wild. But letting go was more than a matter of instinct. It was a matter of love. And love, the ranger realized, sometimes means surrender. The authorities had begun circling. Reports stacked on his desk. Colleagues asked questions he couldn't keep dodging. And the note left on his door, that threat remained etched in his mind. If he didn't act, someone else would. And that someone might not choose mercy. So he called. The number was burned into memory, the Federal Red Wolf Recovery Office. His voice shook as he explained, leaving out the storm, leaving out the weeks of care, focusing only on the fact, I have a pup. Alive. It needs placement. Silence on the other end, then a clipped reply. You did the right thing. Prepare for transfer. But as he hung up, he wasn't sure if he believed it. The day of release arrived with a sky painted in fire-red streaks across the horizon, as though the land itself was marking the moment. The ranger packed the crate once more, lined with blankets worn by weeks of use. The pup stepped in without resistance, trusting him, unaware of what was to come. They drove in silence, the road winding through marsh and pine. Every mile felt like another thread snapping inside him. He remembered the first night, the fragile breaths, the fever, the howl that almost never came. He remembered storms, coyotes, nights by the fire. And he wondered if the wolf remembered too. At the release site, biologists waited. Clipboards, tranquilizer kits, tracking collars, science and procedure laid out with precision. They greeted him politely, but their eyes carried judgment he couldn't mistake. You understand, this was a breach of protocol, one said. He nodded, unable to answer. They placed the pup on the ground. For a moment, it froze, sniffing the grass, ears twitching to sounds of unseen life. The ranger knelt, hand brushing the pup's fur one last time. Go, he whispered. Find your family. Make the wild yours again. The wolf hesitated. Then, as if understanding it, bounded forward, clumsy at first, then surer with each stride. At the tree line it stopped, turned, its golden eyes locked with his, and it howled. That howl pierced him deeper than any reprimand, deeper than any storm. It was farewell, but also promise. A reminder that bonds do not vanish with distance, they echo like howls across marshes. The wolf turned again and slipped into the forest. The ranger remained kneeling, tears mixing with the damp earth, until the last trace of fur vanished into green. The biologists recorded notes, fitted collars, spoke of survival rates and monitoring data. But the ranger heard none of it. All he heard was the echo of that final howl. He drove home with an empty crate in the back seat. His cabin was silent. His hands felt hollow without the weight of the pup. But in his heart, the bond remained. He knew that somewhere in the swamp, a young wolf was running wild and free. And he knew it would always remember the man who gave it a second chance. Weeks passed. The cabin felt hollow without the sound of paws on wood, without the midnight howls that once filled its silence. The ranger returned to his routines, patrolling fences, logging data, attending meetings, but every task felt slower, heavier. The absence lingered like a shadow. Then one morning, his radio crackled with an update from the recovery team. A young wolf recently collared had been tracked roaming with a small group in the wetlands. Strong, healthy. The ranger froze, heart thundering. He didn't need to ask which wolf it was. He knew. For days he scanned the marsh at sunrise, hoping for a glimpse. And one evening, as mist curled over the water, he heard it a howl. Not the fragile cry of a pup, but a full resonant call. Strong, defiant, alive. The sound echoed through cypress and pine, rolling across the wetlands like an anthem. It was answered, another wolf, then another. A chorus. The ranger closed his eyes, smiling through tears. His wolf was no longer alone. News spread beyond the marshes. Conservation bulletins reported the birth of red wolf pups that spring, 43 in total, 26 surviving. For a species teetering at the edge, each pup was a miracle. And somewhere among them, the ranger imagined his wolf might be playing a role. He knew he could never prove it, but the thought sustained him. Every howl he heard on night patrol, every flash of red fur in the distance was enough. The wild had reclaimed what was always its own, and he had played a small part in giving it back. As autumn came, the marsh burned with colors of rust and gold. Migrating birds filled the skies, and the air grew sharp with the scent of pine. On one patrol, the ranger paused on a ridge overlooking the floodplain. A shadow moved among the trees. Red fur flashed in sunlight. He raised his binoculars. A young wolf stood at the tree line, larger now, confident eyes glowing with the same fire he remembered. It turned its head toward him. For a moment, the distance collapsed. They stared at each other, man and wolf bound by memory. Then the wolf raised its muzzle and howled. The ranger lowered his binoculars, heart swelling. He didn't call out. He didn't move closer. He simply listened as the howl faded into the wind. When it ended, the wolf turned and disappeared into the forest. He knew it was farewell, not a permanent one, but a reminder that the wild was no longer his to hold. It was thriving on its own terms. That night, the ranger sat by his fire, staring into embers. For the first time in months, his chest felt light. The silence was no longer emptiness, it was peace. He whispered into the flames, not expecting an answer. Run free, little one. The world is yours now. And somewhere beyond the marsh, beneath the rising moon, a red wolf howled. Every story leaves behind a lesson. And this one of a ranger, a storm, and a red wolf pup carries more than one. It reminds us that survival is fragile. That one storm can nearly erase an entire species. That one act of compassion can tip the scale back toward hope. The ranger's choice wasn't easy. It defied rules, tested laws, and demanded sacrifice. But his decision echoed something deeper, the truth that humans and wild creatures are bound together. Our futures rise and fall as one. The red wolf stands as a symbol. Once erased from the wild, it survived because people refused to let it vanish. Biologists, conservationists, and communities fought sometimes against odds, sometimes against fear, to give it another chance. And still today, that fight continues. Only a handful remain. Each pup matters. Each release matters. Each howl across the wetlands matters. We too have choices. We can turn away, let silence replace the howl, or we can listen, support, and act. Protecting endangered species is not charity, it is responsibility. Because when wolves vanish, ecosystems unravel. And when ecosystems unravel, so do we. Perhaps the greatest lesson is that love doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes it means letting go, so that what you love can thrive where it belongs. The ranger learned this as he watched the pup vanish into the forest, not lost but found. That howl under the rising moon wasn't